You know, usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of absolute, almost comforting precision. It's kind of like engineering, right? You fall off a bike, you break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line on the screen, and the doctor just points and says, there it is.
Right, yeah. It's visible, it's categorized. We desperately want the world to work in those, like, clean, binary terms, broken or not broken.
Right. But then, you step out of the orthopedics ward and into the world of human identity, and suddenly that x-ray machine is just utterly useless. We're looking at a diagnostic landscape that is, well, honestly, it's murky. It's just this mess of overlapping shadows.
Oh, it is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters. The tools we use to understand bone and tissue completely fail when we try to isolate something as abstract as a self. And, that is exactly the landscape we are navigating today.
Exactly. So welcome to today's deep dive. We are looking at a really fascinating stack of sources for you today. It's this unique mix of university lecture presentations, comprehensive learning guides, and actual performance task rubrics for a first-year nursing course. The course is titled Understanding the Self.
Yeah, and the core assignment for these BSN Year 1 nursing students is honestly quite daunting when you really look at it. They don't just have to memorize anatomy. They are tasked with writing a 500 to 800 word personal identity narrative answering one of the oldest, most fiercely debated questions in human history. Who am I?
Right. And the rubric is strict. Like, they can't just list their name, their major, or, their physical description. They have to figure out what truly defines them underneath all of those labels. So our mission today is to take you on that exact same journey. We're going to unpack how ancient philosophers, modern psychologists, and contemporary sociologists have all attempted to answer this question. We really want to give you the ultimate toolkit to understand your own identity.
Yeah, we are tracing the evolution of how humanity has conceptualized the self. It's really about seeing how these different theories layer on top of each other.
Totally. And I just want to say right up front, this isn't some dry academic exercise. We're not just reciting a syllabus to you. Think of this as a practical blueprint for self-discovery. We are essentially doing a personal audit for you today, a way to figure out what truly makes you you. So let's unpack this. If you can't just point to an x-ray, where do we even start looking?
Well, the instinct for most of human history has been to look entirely inward. If we go back to classical philosophy to ancient Greece, the prevailing idea was that the true self is a fixed, internal, and non-physical entity. You can kind of think of it as an inner citadel.
Oh, right. You're talking about the soul.
Exactly. That's the classic term for it, yes. Socrates was really the one who planted this flag. He argued that the self is the rational soul. He famously decreed, the unexamined life is not worth living.
Right. That classic quote.
Yeah, but to understand why he said that, you really have to look at his view of the physical world. To him, the body is just a temporary, corruptible vessel. The soul is eternal. So the only way to find yourself isn't through physical experiences, but by aggressively questioning your own assumptions, stripping away false beliefs through this intense internal dialogue.
It sounds exhausting, honestly, but also strangely empowering. But his student, Plato, he takes this idea of the soul and makes it a lot more complicated, right? Because anyone who has ever made a New Year's resolution knows that the inner self isn't always on the same page.
Oh, absolutely. Plato was highly aware of that internal friction. He recognized that we are often torn in different directions. So he introduces this concept of the tripartite soul, the idea that our inner self is actually divided into three distinct parts competing for influence. You have reason, which he located in the head.
Okay, the head.
Yeah. Then spirit, representing ambition and courage, in the chest.
Yeah.
And appetite, our baseline bodily desires, in the abdomen.
And he used the allegory of a charioteer to explain how they all interact, didn't he?
He did. Imagine reason is the driver of a chariot, desperately trying to steer two very different horses. One is the noble horse of spirit, which wants glory and honor, and the other is the unruly, stubborn horse of appetite, which just wants immediate gratification.
Okay, I love this, but let me put it in modern terms for a second. It's like a corporate structure inside your mind. So reason is the rational CEO trying to steer the company toward long-term stability.
I like that.
Right. And spirit is your highly motivated but super aggressive sales director who just wants to win industry awards at all costs. And appetite is the impulsive intern who is trying to spend the entire quarterly budget on snacks and office parties.
That captures the dynamic perfectly. Though, the stakes for Plato were a bit higher than office snacks. For a healthy, just cells to exist, that CEO reason must maintain absolute control over the other two. If the intern takes over, the self collapses into chaos.
So the goal is control and internal balance.
Yes. And as we move into the 4th century with St. Augustine, we see this internal focus shift slightly. Augustine merged this classical introspection with theology. He also saw a divided interior self, specifically a battle between the flesh and the spirit. But he introduced a mechanical structure to identity. He believed the self is built on 3 pillars.
Okay, what are they?
Memory, which ties us to the past. Understanding, which roots us in the present. And will, which directs us toward the future.
Oh, interesting. So he's basically bringing the concept of time into the definition of the self.
He's making time the glue that holds the self together, yes. But ultimately, for Augustine, because the self is temporal, it is restless and incomplete until it finds permanent union with God.
The journey is still entirely inward, though. You're looking deep inside your own mind to find the truth.
Exactly. And that inward journey reaches its absolute radical peak with René Descartes in the 17th century. Descartes is famous for a process called methodological doubt. He wanted to find a foundation for knowledge that was absolutely unshakable. To do that, he decided to doubt everything he could possibly doubt.
Which means questioning reality itself, like a 17th century version of the Matrix.
That's a really good way to frame it. He asked, what if my senses are lying to me? What if the physical world doesn't exist? What if my own body is an illusion created by a deceptive demon? He stripped away everything until he hit bedrock.
He stripped it all the way down to the studs, so what's left when you doubt literally everything?
The one thing he realized he could not doubt was the fact that he was doubting. And if he is doubting, well, there must be a mind performing the action of doubt. Hence, cogito ergo sum, I think. Therefore I am.
Right, the most famous philosophy quote ever.
Exactly. And this leads to Cartesian dualism. Descartes draws a strict, impenetrable line between the mind and the body. He concludes the mind, the thinking thing, is the true, undeniable self. The body is just a mechanical machine it happens to drive around in.
Okay, let's pause here. For anyone listening, think about what this means. For centuries, the prevailing wisdom was that your identity was this permanent, indestructible inner core. Whether you called it a soul, a CEO, or a thinking mind, it was fixed. It was who you truly were, independent of the messy physical world.
But that assumption is incredibly vulnerable, because if the self is fundamentally just our conscious thoughts, what happens when the mind changes?
Or what happens when the mind forgets? This is where the idea of a fixed inner core starts to look a little shaky. If my identity is my mind, but my mind is constantly shifting, that feels precarious.
You're hitting on the exact pivot point that changed philosophy. Enlightenment thinkers started to realize that identity might not be an indestructible soul at all. It might just be a fragile psychological construction. And John Locke really blew the doors off the classical view.
Because he rejected the idea that we are born with an innate soul or pre-programmed ideas.
Right, entirely. Locke argued that we are born as a tabula rasa, a blank slate. We only become a self through experience. For Locke, the self isn't a magical substance in the chest or the head. It is simply consciousness. And personal identity relies entirely on one thing, the continuity of memory.
Wait, so...
You are the same person today as you were yesterday, strictly because you can remember being that person yesterday.
Wait, hold on. If I can't remember being 5 years old, does that mean the 5-year-old me is literally a different person? Or what about someone with severe dementia? If my identity relies entirely on the continuity of memory, doesn't that make the self incredibly fragile? I mean, memory is notoriously unreliable. We forget things all the time.
That is the glaring flaw in Locke's theory, and it's precisely the vulnerability that David Hume attacked a generation later. Hume was an extreme empiricist, meaning he believed we can only know what we can directly observe. So he applied this to the self. He said, when I look deep inside my own mind, I don't find a permanent self. I never catch an eye.
So what does he find? If he's just looking in there.
He just finds fleeting perceptions. A feeling of being cold, a flash of anger, a memory of his smell, a sudden hunger. Hume introduced the bundle theory. He argued the self is an illusion. There is no core operating system.
It's just a rapid stream of perceptions, like looking at a flip book. If you flip the pages fast enough, it looks like a single moving character, but in reality it's just a bunch of disconnected drawings.
That illustrates Hume's point perfectly. The brain tricks us into thinking there is a unified person, but we are really just a perpetual flux of changing sensations. There's no enduring self behind the experiences. The experiences are the entire thing.
Which honestly sounds terrifying. It's a full existential crisis. It means that you listening to this right now will cease to exist the second your mood changes?
It was highly destabilizing, which is why Immanuel Kant felt compelled to synthesize this chaos. Kant looked at Hume's flipbook and said, okay, Hume is right that we are bombarded by a chaotic influx of perceptions, but Hume is missing something crucial.
Someone has to be flipping the pages.
Exactly. Kant argued there must be an active I organizing all that chaotic data. He called it the transcendental unity of apperception.
Let's unpack that jargon because that is a mouthful.
Yeah, it's dense. Think of it this way. If I hand you 1,000 jigsaw puzzle pieces without the box, those pieces are meaningless noise. But your mind has a built-in framework and understanding of space, time, and causality that allows you to put those pieces together into a coherent picture.
Oh, I see.
Kant said the self isn't a physical thing you can find, but it is the active organizer behind the scenes making sense of the world. Without that unified self processing the data, experience itself would be impossible.
So the philosophers essentially debated themselves into a corner. I mean, is the self a soul? Is it just memory? Is it an illusion? Or is it an invisible organizer? It feels like they hit a wall by just staring at their own thoughts.
They largely did. By the late 19th and 20th centuries, thinkers began looking away from conscious philosophy. They started looking for identity below the surface of consciousness and directly at the physical body.
Let's talk about looking below the surface first. Sigmund Freud completely changes the game with the iceberg model.
He really does. Freud argued that centuries of philosophers obsessing over reason and conscious thought were missing the vast majority of the picture. He said the conscious mind is just the tiny tip of the iceberg visible above the water.
The vast majority of who we are is submerged. It's the unconscious.
Right. Repressed desires, childhood traumas, primal instincts, these are what actually drive behavior. Freud divided the psyche in a way that echoes Plato, actually, but much darker. You have the id, which operates purely on the pleasure principle, demanding immediate gratification.
Like the intern.
Yes. Then you have the superego, which is our internalized moral compass, constantly judging us with societal rules. And caught in the middle is the ego, the conscious self.
So the ego is just frantically acting as a referee. It's trying to keep you from acting on your darkest impulses while still surviving in polite society. Like, you might secretly want to scream at your boss and throw your coffee. That's the ID. The superego says, that is immoral and you will be fired. And the ego has to find a compromise, so you just aggressively type an email instead.
It's a permanent, exhausting wrestling match. And Freud believed that conflict is your true self. But while Freud was diving deep into the hidden, murky waters of the unconscious mind, behaviorists like Gilbert Ryle were going in the complete opposite direction.
Ryle basically looked at all of this, souls, organizers, icebergs, and called it nonsense.
He did. Ryle mocked Descartes' dualism in particular, coining the phrase the ghost in the machine. He argued there is no hidden ghost pulling the levers of your brain. To Ryle, the self is simply your observable behavior. You are what you do. Trying to find a hidden self beyond your actions is, to him, a grammatical mistake.
Wow. And then the neuroscientists show up in our source materials and take it even further into the physical realm. We see Paul Churchland advocating for eliminative materialism. He basically says the self is literally just the physical brain. It's neural pathways firing, neurotransmitters, and chemical reactions. That's it.
It is a radically materialist view. In his view, concepts like beliefs, desires, or even souls are just outdated folk psychology that we will eventually replace with pure neuroscience once our brain imaging technology gets good enough.
Okay, let me bring in an analogy here because I think it's important to challenge this extreme biological view. Saying the self is just brain chemistry feels like looking at a beautiful, priceless painting, say the Mona Lisa, and saying, well, it's just canvas and pigmented oil. Technically, chemically, you're right. But aren't we missing the actual art? Aren't we completely dismissing the lived experience of being a human?
That critique is a major part of the curriculum, and it bridges perfectly to Maurice Merleau-Ponty. He was a phenomenologist, meaning he studied the structure of conscious experience, and he would agree with your painting analogy completely. He rejected the mind-body split entirely, arguing for what he called the embodied self.
Meaning the mind and body aren't two separate things at all.
Right. His famous phrase was, "I am my body." You don't have a conscious mind trapped inside a meat vehicle. Your perception of the world is inextricably woven into your physical form. Think about how being intensely hungry physically alters your mood, or how muscle memory allows a musician's hands to play a complex song without the conscious mind telling them to do it. The body is intelligent.
Okay, let's take a breath and review the toolkit so far. We've gone from the self being a hidden soul to a fragile chain of memories to a referee of unconscious desires to raw brain chemistry and finally to a unified physical experience. But wait, every single one of these thinkers has treated the self like it's a solo project, like it's just you alone in a room trying to figure yourself out in a vacuum.
It's a glaring oversight, isn't it? Sociologists look at this entire historical timeline and point out that you cannot have a self without society. The self isn't something you are born with, and it isn't something you discover in isolation. It is built through interaction.
Which brings us to the concept of the social mirror.
Exactly. Charles Horton Cooley introduced a brilliant theory called the looking glass self. He argued that our identity doesn't come from inside. It happens in three distinct external steps. First, we imagine how we appear to other people. Second, we imagine how they're judging that appearance. And third, we develop a self feeling like pride, shame, or embarrassment, based entirely on that imagined judgment.
Let me make sure I'm getting this. It's not even what they actually think of us. It's what we imagine they think of us. So if I wear a new jacket to a party, I imagine how I look in it. I imagine my friends thinking it looks ridiculous, and I instantly feel self-conscious and take it off, even if nobody actually said a word.
Precisely. The mind is fundamentally social. We become who we think you think we are. Our self-worth is a reflection of the social mirror. George Herbert Mead built on this. He said the self develops strictly through social experience. He split identity into two phases, the I and the me.
What's the difference?
Well, the I is your spontaneous, uncalculated self. It's a part of you that reacts in real time. But the me is your socialized self. It's what happens when you internalize the expectations of what Mead called the generalized other, which is basically society at large. The me is the voice in your head saying, people like us don't act like that.
Okay, but this gets incredibly intense when you bring in Erving Goffman. Because Goffman introduces the dramaturgical approach. He argues that all of social life is quite literally a theatrical performance.
Yeah, we are all actors on a stage managing our scripts.
Yeah, right. He talks about impression management. We have a front stage. For the public, think of your customer service voice at work, or the highly curated version of yourself you put on a dating app. And we only drop the act and relax on the backstage, maybe when we're alone in our car or with our closest friends. But this raises a huge existential concern. If Goffman is right, and I'm just playing different roles for different audiences, is there any authentic me at all? Or am I just a social chameleon faking it for everyone?
It's a profound tension, and it's something the nursing students have to grapple with in their essays. Sociologists would argue that the authentic you isn't hidden behind the masks. The authentic you is actually the sum total of how you navigate those different roles. You aren't a chameleon faking it. You are a complex social being adapting to a dynamic environment. But to understand how we adapt, we have to recognize that the people whose judgments shape us, that audience Goffman talks about, they aren't just random people. They're heavily programmed by culture.
Which brings us to our final lens in the stack, the cultural canvas. Anthropology shows us that what constitutes a self isn't a universal human standard. It varies wildly across the globe.
The French anthropologist Marcel Mauss made a crucial distinction here. He talked about moi, which is your basic biological, inborn awareness of your own body and person, which is a complex social identity built completely by your culture's laws, religions, and customs. The moi might be universal, but the person is vastly different depending on where you were born.
And the sources break this down into a massive cultural divide, right? Individualistic versus collectivistic cultures.
Yes. In Western cultures like the US or Western Europe, the cultural programming emphasizes the independent self. The core values we teach our children are autonomy, personal goals, self-reliance, uniqueness. The goal is to stand out from the crowd and actualize your inner potential. But in many other parts of the world, particularly in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, the emphasis is on the interdependent self. It's about your roles, group cohesion, and maintaining harmony within the community.
Let me try another analogy to summarize this cultural divide, because I think it's vital for understanding the difference. The individualistic self is like a standalone software program. It's running on its own computer, trying to maximize its own processing power and achieve its own individual tasks. But the collectivist self is like a cloud-based network. Everyone's data is fundamentally linked together, and the system only works and only finds its purpose if the whole network is in harmony.
I think that captures the operational difference well. And the university rubrics highlight this beautifully by focusing on Filipino cultural values as a case study. They introduce a concept taught by the psychologist Virgilio Enriquez called kapwa.
Kapwa translates to the shared self, doesn't it?
Yes, and it requires a complete paradigm shift if you are used to Western individualism. In the worldview of Kapwa, the self isn't separate from others. It doesn't end at the boundary of your skin. It exists in a shared humanity. You do not define yourself by how you differ from the group, but by how you connect to it.
It's not just about getting along or being polite. It's a fundamental structural understanding that my identity is tied to yours.
Exactly. It plays out in daily life through values like Bayanahan, which is an intense, active community spirit and cooperation, and Utangna Lub, which translates to a deep-seated debt of gratitude. This isn't just saying thank you for a favor, it's a recognition of a lifelong reciprocal bond. In this culture, your selfhood is achieved through your connection to the community, not your separation from it.
Okay, we have covered an immense amount of ground. We've gone from ancient Greece to modern neuroscience through the halls of sociology and global anthropology. Let's pull all of this together and bring it back to those BSN Year 1 nursing students staring at a blank page, trying to answer the prompt, who are you beyond your name and physical description? What is the ultimate takeaway for them and for the listener doing this personal audit?
The takeaway is that finding the self requires multiple lenses. You are a combination of Plato's charioteer trying to balance your reason and your chaotic desires. You are Locke's chain of memories, carrying the weight of your past into your present. You are driven by Freud's hidden unconscious currents, and you are Cooley's social mirror, constantly shaped by the community and the specific cultural network you reflect. To write that narrative, or to truly understand yourself, you have to recognize that you are all of these things simultaneously.
It's a composite sketch. It's not one clean X-ray, it's a mosaic. But before we wrap up, there is one final provocative thought we want to leave you with, something to mull over that builds on everything we've just unpacked.
Yeah. In the sociological materials, there's a brief mention of the psychologist Lev Vygotsky. He theorized that our internal thoughts, our very minds, are shaped by the social communication and the cultural tools we use.
The tools we use literally shape how our minds work.
Yes. So let's apply that to today. If our identity is shaped by our tools and our social mirrors, how is living our lives on the internet, communicating constantly through algorithms, and now interacting with artificial intelligence, fundamentally creating a completely new type of self?
Oh, wow.
We are outsourcing our memories to hard drives, which disrupts Locke. We are performing on digital front stages 24/7, which amplifies Goffman.
If the self is a mirror, what happens when the mirror is a smartphone screen, curated by an algorithm designed to manipulate your attention? What kind of self does that produce?
It's a self that Socrates or Descartes or even Goffman could never have predicted.
That is definitely something to think about. We started this deep dive talking about X-rays, how we want a clean, black and white, binary picture of our identity. But the truth is, the self isn't a bone you can photograph. It's the marrow. It's hidden, it's messy, it's constantly generating new life, and it's inextricably tied to the whole body of society. The muddy waters might be hard to navigate, but that is exactly where you find out who you really are.